Perfect. Thank you, Quentin. Just as a couple of things, for those of you who are online, please feel free to use the chat feature as well as our Q&A section. We'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation today, so you're welcome to ask questions through there. We'll try and get your questions answered when they show up. We'll let Kevin know, hey, there's a question for you, as well as anyone who's here in person. Please feel free to ask any questions. We'd be more than happy to answer those. Kevin's a great resource for that. So without further ado, I have a quick bio I'd like to read, and then we'll turn the time over to Kevin. Kevin Robison is an environmental health and safety professional with over 35 years of experience in industry and consulting. He has an undergraduate and master's degree in occupational safety and health and environmental management from Utah State and the University of Utah. He is a board-certified CSP in comprehensive practice. He is a National Safety Council safety instructor and provides regular safety and health training at the Utah Safety Council in the Advanced Safety Certification Program. He is a competitive cyclist and resides in Holladay, Utah. Let's give a hand for Kevin Robison. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you. It's good to be here to talk about safety. It's one of the things that I have a great passion for. And today we're going to be talking about OSHA record keeping, and specifically those things that relate to injury and illness reporting. This is a very timely topic. Hopefully it's on your radar screen right now for attention, and we'll talk about that as we go through our materials today. Just a couple of things I want to point out. We will be talking just about the illness and injury reporting today, and this is not part of workers' compensation reporting. Those are two separate items. I'll make reference to that in a little bit, but those are two different distinct items. The regulation that we're going to be talking about today is in 29 CFR 1904. So you can, if you have any follow-up questions, you can refer back to that section of the Code of Federal Regulations. Now, if OSHA record keeping is brand new to you and really want to get into the weeds and into the deep of this topic, we're actually offering a half-day class on January 8th. So if that's something that's a responsibility of yours to complete that reporting and it's new to you, I'd recommend that you give consideration for that class. So today we're just going to be talking just kind of a high-level overview of what that standard requires. Just to clarify, the standard really only applies to those employers that have 10 or more employees at any time during the year. Okay, those that have less than 10 employees are not required to comply with this requirement. Question?
So sorry, we just need to ask for real quick.
Okay.
You're currently off the camera.
Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the only exception to that is if you are invited by OSHA to submit injury and illness data, they will send you a written notification, and where they may require you to track that information. But generally speaking, for the masses, if you have 10 or more than 10 employees at any one time during the year, and that's as a company as a whole, that's not just one office, then you're required to keep those records. Now, a number of industries are exempt from this requirement. We call those low hazard industries. And in the standard, OSHA details out those types of industries. Are based by standard industry classification codes, things like retail, things like insurance companies, those types of industries that are not generally industries that have frequent incidents or illnesses as a result of their employees working there. I do want to point out this is this record keeping is on top of the attention list of OSHA's regulatory agenda, because this is one that is frequently cited, and I'll explain that in just a few minutes. It's one that makes the top 10 list quite frequently in OSHA's annual summary of the standards that have been violated during the year. So it's something you definitely want to pay attention to because it is a top 10 one. Now, if there's one thing that you remember from today, it's probably this last one here. In this standard, there's a requirement for injury and illness reporting that are of a severe nature. So let me explain that. If you have a fatality in your place of employment, you're required to report that to OSHA within 8 hours. Okay? If OSHA hears about your fatality in your workplace on the nightly news, that's probably not going to work out so well for you. Okay? So you have 8 hours to report that, and you just have to contact their office. Now, they also have several other classifications that require reporting. Anytime you have an individual that has an amputation, loss of an eye, or any employee that's admitted to a hospital, that needs to be reported within 24 hours. And again, if you don't report that and they find that out afterwards, that was not reported to them, you will be likely to receive failure to report citation. Now, in the state of Utah, there's a little bit of extension of this. In Utah, OSHA actually asks that you also report severe injuries. And that's a very gray word. And so I would recommend that you go out to their standard and read the definition of what they consider a severe injury is. Well, in the class, we'll actually go through that in January. But if you have a severe injury, you have, again, 24 hours to report that to them. And again, a failure to report any one of those within those timeframes will subject you to scrutiny by OSHA and more than likely a citation. Okay? Any questions there? Anyone online? Okay, very good. So let's now get into the reporting itself. One thing that's important that we distinguish and outline is that just because you have an injury that has to be reported to OSHA does not mean that there was fault on the part of the employer, that an OSHA standard was violated, that the employer was at fault. It's a no-fault reporting system. They just want to know anytime you have certain types of incidents. We'll outline those in just a minute. The classifications that OSHA has dictated that incidents be classified under are medical treatment, restricted time, lost time, and fatality. Those are the type of incidents they want to hear about. And we'll show you what that reporting mechanism looks like in a minute. Now, how they ask that you report those, there are 3 separate reports that are completed to document that information. We have the OSHA 301 incident report, the OSHA 300 log, and the OSHA 300A summary. We'll now take a few minutes and go through each one of those. Before we do that, let's first talk about what has to be, or what's the criteria for reporting an injury or illness to OSHA. Number 1, it has to be work-related. Okay, let me give an example. Let's say that of one that wouldn't be work-related. Let's say that you have a basketball hoop out in the back parking lot, and during lunch, some of the workers go out and shoot a little hoop. You know, they're working towards their drafting into the NBA, okay? And somebody sprains an ankle. They go to the doctor. Yeah, you can't walk for a couple of days. Now, normally thinking, you would think, okay, well, that happened to work, so I need to report that to OSHA. They were not in the course of their work responsibility or their duty, so that's not work-related, so that would not actually be reported to OSHA because it's not work-related. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? It has to be a new case. So if an individual has a repeat injury, that's only reported once. Okay, so it has to be a new case. And then it has to meet one of the recording criteria, and we'll go through those recording criteria in a minute. But these are the three primary indicators of whether or not you report an incident or illness to OSHA. Number one, it has to be work-related, has to be a new case, and it needs to meet the recording criteria. Now, this is where the compensability sometimes gets a little confusing, or how the workers' compensation. Let's go back to the work-related case that I gave, where the person sprained their ankle playing basketball out in the back parking lot. That would not necessarily be OSHA recordable, but it more than likely would be compensable under workers' compensation because it happened on the employer's premises. Okay, and that's where this gets a little confusing. So now here we have an incident that is OSHA recordable, but it's not OSHA recordable, but it's compensable under workers' compensation. And then you're going to also have cases that are not compensable under workers' compensation and also maybe OSHA recordable. And so they run the gamut. So I use that as an example, but those are the three primary reporting criteria. So let's take a look now at the classification of those type of incidents that are recorded. Number one is medical treatment. These are the recording criteria. If you have an employee that's treated for an injury and it's defined as medical treatment, then that would make it recordable and reportable to OSHA. Basically, OSHA says that's anything other than first aid. When you go into the standard, they define what first aid is. First aid is very simple things. If I go in and let's say I fall and I sprain my wrist, I go to the doctor, he puts an ACE bandage on it and says, okay, let's just wrap it up, let's support it, and you're good to go. That would be considered first aid. Or another example, let's say I get some dust in my eye and I go to the doctor, he flushes it out with water. Again, that flushing with water would make that just first aid treatment. Whereas if I had something embedded in my eye where they actually had to remove it surgically, then that would be OSHA recordable. That would be considered medical treatment. So OSHA publishes a list of first things that are considered first aid, use of hot and cold compress, elastic bandages, finger splints, those simple types of things. Those are all considered first aid. Majority of the things that you report on your OSHA log will fall under this medical treatment definition. That's what makes it the reporting or recording criteria on the OSHA log. So you'll probably burn most of your brain cells trying to figure that, okay, is this medical treatment or is it first aid? Next classification is if you have anyone that has loss of consciousness as a result of an incident. If they lose consciousness, it automatically goes on the log. Okay, whether they go to the doctor or not, if they lose consciousness, technically it's required that they go on the log. Restricted workday incident. If you have anyone that is injured on the job and as a result of their injury, they are placed on light duty status, then that would classify that incident as a recordable incident and would have to go on your log. Same with a lost workday incident. If days of work are missed, this does not include the day on which the injury occurs. Okay, so any lost days after the date of incident, then that would make that criteria to require it to be put on the log. And then obviously any fatalities that occur would also go on the log. So again, going back, needs to meet these three criteria. One of these criteria needs to be work-related. It needs to be a new case, and then it needs to meet one of these criteria, either medical treatment, loss of consciousness, restricted workday, lost workday, or a fatality. Now, hopefully you're not having too many fatalities. That's what we're in the business of trying to prevent. And as a matter of fact, we're trying to prevent all of these. The majority of the incidents that you have will fall under that definition of medical treatment. And that's where you'll spend probably most of your time making a determination. Does this go on the log or does this not? Okay, any questions? Okay, yes,
So it doesn't matter who's providing medical treatment. It could be a doctor, it could be a surgeon, but if it's just the first aid stuff that they do, not recordable.
yes, if it's considered, if you look at the definition of first aid, it is not considered OSHA recordable.
So then so just going to the doctor alone, wouldn't be enough.
Yeah, just because they go to the doctor, that does not make it automatically OSHA recordable. Okay. Yeah, so you look at that definition of what's considered first aid, but anything outside of first aid, they don't make a list of what's considered medical treatment. They just say, okay, if it's first aid, doesn't go on. If it is medical treatment, it goes on. Very good.
I have a question. What if the person doesn't refuse to go to the doctor? Like, let's say they have a construction company,
Yeah.
And whatever, I don't want to go to the doctor. How do you report this?
Yeah, well, if they don't, so let's go back. If it's work related, and obviously it would be a new case, and then it has to meet one of these recording criteria. And if it's not professional, there's no professional medical treatment given, there's no loss of consciousness, there's no restricted workday, no lost workday, or no fatality, it doesn't go on your log. Now, some companies have the capacity and the ability to provide in-house medical treatment. So if that treatment provided in-house meets the definition of medical treatment, then it would go on the log. So I know some companies have occupational health nurses on staff, and they could provide one of those categories of medical treatment. Okay, very good. Okay, so now let's talk about the forms. So I mentioned that if you make a determination you have an incident that's required to be reported to OSHA, there are 3 forms. The first one is the OSHA 301 incident report. This is used to document the incident and the investigation of the incident. Now, OSHA actually does have a form for this. Here's an example of what that form looks like. OSHA does not require that you use this form. Most organizations use the employer's first report of injury. That's a workers' compensation form. Okay, and all of you should be familiar with that form. Okay, that can take the place of the OSHA 301. Okay, so that's what most companies use to document that incident. Yes, question.
On our first report of injury from travelers, it doesn't have, I believe it's the date of hire. So will it still meet the 301? Because
Yes.
the 301 does ask for the date of hire.
Yeah.
It will.
It will, yes. I've never seen them criticize that. It just says they use the word, doesn't say it has to be exact, it says comparable.
Okay.
Okay. Good question. Okay, OSHA requires that once an incident occurs, that 301 should be completed within 7 days. Now, I haven't ever seen anyone cited for failure to complete that form in 7 days. I have seen people cited for not submitting the equivalent of a 301. So the employer's first report of injury. I had a customer that I was consulting with, and they had received a citation. They had changed their insurance company, and their insurance company traditionally in the past had filed their employer's first report of injury forms. They changed carriers. That somehow got dropped. They had incidents. Those first reports of injuries were not being filed to the Labor Commission here in Utah. They had an OSHA inspection, and the compliance officer said, "We don't have any employer first reports of injury for any of these incidents on your log," and they were cited. So this 301 or the equivalent needs to make sure it's completed, because and it was a pretty hefty citation that they received. So that 301 needs to be completed. And again, here in Utah, that employer first report of injury, and that goes to the Industrial Commission. And that's how they're able to track that. Okay. Again, here's the example of the OSHA 301. Again, this one doesn't have to be used. The comparable form can be used, and most organizations use the employer's first report of injury. Okay, so the next form we're going to talk about is the log. This one is very important. This is used, it's a log that's required to document OSHA incidents, injuries and illnesses that have been deemed to be recordable. Again, medical, they meant the definition of medical treatment. There was restricted time, there was lost work time, or there was a fatality. Okay. OSHA requires that that be entered into that log within 7 days of the incident occurring. OSHA does have a form. Many of you have probably seen this form before to complete that log. They, again, do not require that you use this form, but they do allow you to use a comparable. And if you actually go out to their website, www.osha.gov, they actually have an electronic file that you can download that allow you to track and keep your OSHA log on. It's an Excel file. Okay. So they allow you, if you want to use your own in-house database, you can do that as long as the information is comparable with what OSHA requires. Okay. That's required to be available for review by OSHA anytime they come on site. So if there's ever they come there for an inspection, if they come there for an investigation, if they come there for a question, let me repeat this. They will always, let me repeat it again, always ask to see your OSHA log. And this is why it is a top 10 OSHA deficiency, is because some people don't maintain those logs. So if they're there to investigate an incident that you reported, so if you call OSHA and say, hey, I had an employee that was hospitalized, generally they're going to come on site to do an investigation of the incident. And one of the first questions they're going to say, sir or ma'am, can we see the last 3 years of your OSHA logs? Okay. So they need to be available. So you need to know where those are at, and they need to be maintained for 5 years. Now, when we look at the OSHA 300 log form, you can see the information that it requests: the employee's name, their title, the date of injury, what occurred, describe the injury, and then you classify the case. Was it a death, days away from work, restricted time, lost time, or was it an illness or injury? And then you enter in the number of days, if they're lost or restricted work days. And then you classify the case over on the very far right-hand side. So it's pretty simple information. But again, you can use a comparable form or your own database to track those. Again, this needs to be maintained during the year. And in my professional experience as a safety practitioner and safety manager, I had these requested a lot. So you need to make sure that you know where they're at and how where they're kept. Taylor, a question.
Yeah, so is there a standard for type of security to keep these forms? Because I can imagine that there's some medical information in relation to individuals' injuries. And granted, we're not saying any medical treatments, but that could be medical information. Is there a standard for securing these?
There's not a standard, but you bring up a good point. We talk about this in the class in January. They do have the provision to put in the field of what occurred or in the description of the injury or illness. If it's of a sensitive nature, you can write confidential in there.
Oh.
So let me give you an example. When I was a safety manager for a company, we had a female employee that was unfortunately raped at work. It was during her work shift. So here again, it happened at work. It was a new case and it required medical treatment. So it had to be reported and recorded to OSHA. On the OSHA log, I didn't put in the employee's name, I wrote confidential to protect her identity. And the same in the field for the description of the injury, what the injury was, I wrote confidential. And you have the ability to do that. But otherwise, they don't have any specific or specification about how these are to be kept secured. You kind of do that within your own company document management system. Okay. Any other questions on the log? This is a really important one. We're now coming to the end of the year. At the end of the year, you're asked to total those things up. Okay. And that's what precipitates the next form, and that's the 300A. The OSHA 300A is the summary of the OSHA 300 log. And this is the information that OSHA wants to receive on an annual basis. Okay. Basically, it's the year-end totals. Some of the fields that are required on that form is you need to have your average number of employees, the number of hours worked, and the number of OSHA recordable incidents. So if you do the math and know how to calculate an OSHA recordable incident rate, we need those things there to be able to calculate that OSHA recordable incident rate. And that's what OSHA uses that information for, is to calculate your OSHA recordable incident rate, so then they can compare your firm with like companies. And is your rate higher or lower, or where are you at in the spectrum of your losses in your organization related to safety? It also requires a company executive certification. Okay, so you need to have one of your company officers sign it, and then it is submitted to OSHA in March. Okay, it has to be posted February 1st through April 30th. So this is something that needs to be on your to-do list in January. You need to get that OSHA 300 form added up. You need to get the OSHA 300A, pull all those numbers together. And again, this needs to be maintained for 5 years, and also it needs to be available to OSHA. When they request your 300 log, many times they'll ask for your 300A also. Okay, here's the example of the 300A form that's OSHA publishes. And what they're doing, what OSHA's doing over time, is they're moving this. This has been in the past a very manual process. And they required you to send that to them in the mail, and then they would put it into a database and use it and track it. Now, if your company has more than 250 employees, you're required to take this information and enter it in on a website called the ITA app. And that's pretty easy to set up, but they just ask you, and it just expedites the reporting of the information is through that ITA website. Okay. Any questions online or in the class on the OSHA 300A? This is required to be posted again in the facility from February 1st to April 30th. So if you happen to have an OSHA inspection, and I've had this happen multiple times, where I had OSHA come into a facility between February 1st and April 30th, guess what they're going to be looking for? Where your 300A is posted. Generally, this is posted like on like an employee bulletin board or something of that nature, so that employees can see it. After April 30th, it can come down. It doesn't have to stay up all year, but it's required to be posted. And again, if you have if you win the bonus prize and you get an inspection during that time frame, you're going to have them be looking for that, because they'll ask you, can I see where your 300A is posted? And you'll hope you do the pinky finger crossing and everything else to make sure that that got posted. Okay. Any questions online? So that's the 300A. It's pretty straightforward. Now, there are some additional requirements. Some of you in the past may have received a written request for similar information from an agency called the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. They use that information for validating some of OSHA's programs. They're a separate branch of OSHA, and they use that information to validate how OSHA is spending their money, where their attention and focus are. They're kind of an audit arm. So occasionally they'll send out these requests by companies to say, okay, we want to know what your injury and illness rate was. So if you get one of those, you need to make sure that you respond to that. Again, that's done via snail mail. So it's a written form and you mail it into BLS. We already talked about the injury tracking app, the ITA requirement. Right now, that's just for companies that have more than 250 employees. So if you have less than 250 employees, you don't have to use the ITA app, but I found that most companies have migrated. It's just simpler. It's easier just to go into that, set up a username, password, gather your information, complete your 300A, go to the app and log the information in and you're good to go. Okay. And again, that ITA submission deadline is March 2nd. So you have until March 2nd to submit that data. What that does is that gets to OSHA quicker than and more efficiently than a paper copy. Okay, so many times I get the question, why does OSHA want all this information? And why do I have to track my, why are they looking over my shoulder? They use this as a means to ensure that they're using their resources in the best way possible to minimize and reduce injuries in the workplace. So if we're seeing a lot of injuries and illnesses associated with trench cave-ins, then OSHA probably will funnel some of their resources to put in place some focus programs on excavation safety. And so they use this to justify their regulatory agenda. They use this to justify the utilization of their resources. So it is really good information, but also they also use it to validate, hey, are we doing a good job in trying to prevent injury in the workplace? Okay.
Sorry, I have a question, Kevin.
Yes, Taylor.
What would you say that there's been an improvement on worker safety with OSHA reporting, or would you say that's kind of mixed?
I say it's kind of mixed.
Okay.
So in industry, for years and years, the focus has been, what is your OSHA recordable injury rate? That's what gets calculated on the 300A form. And so we see a lot of publications out there, and OSHA's got some databases that are available to the public where you can actually look up what the average OSHA recordable injury rate is for your industry group. And that's helpful because then you can say, okay, here's our rate, and it lets you see and benchmark yourself with other companies. And that's part of why OSHA also gathers this data, because it creates a clearinghouse for companies to benchmark themselves. Now that's just on the OSHA recordable injury rate, and there's a lost time work injury rate also that they calculate that you can determine what the severity of your injuries are if you have a lot that are lost time. Okay. So the other thing I want to point out, we'll talk about that in a minute. One of the things that I had from our training today was that some takeaways, and a couple questions you might ask yourself. Who's maintaining the OSHA log in your organization? If you don't know that, you probably want to find that out. Okay. Who determines the OSHA recordability? It's best to have one person make that determination, because then you're going to have continuity throughout the whole year, because there's lots of gray areas when it comes to determining, is this medical treatment or is this first aid? And if you have the same person making that determination, then you'll have more continuity in your OSHA reporting. Now, in all my years of practice as a safety professional, I never had OSHA come in and scan my log and scrutinize me. Well, that should have been recordable. Well, that should have been first aid. That didn't need to go on your log. I've never had them be that meticulous about scrutinizing, but I have had them. Mr. Robison, your client here did not submit OSHA 301s. They did pick up on that. And so they received a citation for that. Also, who's submitting the 300A report? Where are the past records or the past OSHA logs and 300As kept? So if someone requests them, you can get them to OSHA in a timely order. Generally, they're required to be provided to them same day. Okay. And then this past submission evaluation, when you calculate that information on the 300A form, you come up with that OSHA recordable injury rate. OSHA can see by your past submissions, if your injury rate is increasing, you're more likely to get a knock on the door with an observation by OSHA. We are noticing that your injury rate is increasing. So it basically creates more of an opportunity for OSHA to give them cause to understand why your injury rate is increasing, therefore would precipitate an inspection of your facility. So you want to make sure that you're scrutinizing that and you understand what's going on within your company. Hopefully you're trending downwards and not upwards, and that your injury rate is you're seeing improvement there rather than increasing rate. There's some resources out there that are available to help you. OSHA has got a number of resources on their website at www.osha.gov. Again, we've got a half-day class scheduled for January 8th. It's a really good class. We have lots of discussion in that class. We hear lots of, okay, how would you do this? What about this? And so it's a great class to have lots of dialogue and share some examples. And there's lots of interpretations out there that OSHA has published. We'll introduce you to those letters of interpretation so you can feel a little more comfortable in making that determination. If his wound is super glued, is that OSHA recordable or is that first aid? Things like that. So obviously our class today doesn't allow for that discussion, but we'll get into stuff like that. And then if you have any questions, follow-up questions, please feel free to send me an email. My email address is there. And love to converse with you and answer any questions that you may have. So with that, thank you for the opportunity. I hope you found this helpful and beneficial, and I'll turn it back over to Taylor.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin. I come from an HR background, so a lot of this is something that I'm familiar with, but a lot of it is new and you're always learning. So even within my field of HR that I used to be part of, I learned something new. So up on the screen, or do we have any questions online? It doesn't look like we have any questions online. Any more questions in here for Kevin before we kind of wrap it up? Nope, doesn't look like it. That's fine.
Super gluing cuts like
Yes.
Yes.
Super glue was originally made, I believe, to do first aid stuff. Yeah, so don't do anything without knowing what you're doing. But up on the screen, we actually will have our upcoming course for record keeping and OSHA compliance. So if you have a smart device, scan the QR code. It'll take you right to our website where you can sign up for the course. This will be a great opportunity to learn more about record keeping and OSHA compliance, taught by Kevin himself as well. So it's a great opportunity for you there. Our next item we will be doing, can you change that? Thank you. Our next upcoming Start With Safety will be on workplace violence, how to prevent it, how to recognize it. And we look forward to seeing you then. And if there's nothing else, nope. All right. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. Thank you online. Thank you for those who came in person, and stay safe.
Safe, Taylor.
And then I'll try. I learned something.